Hey guys, what's up? This is AJ. Welcome back to another video. In this video, we are gonna set up this little field over here, camera offset, which we can uh, s- use to set how wide we want the camera to look at the player, and we can do it in all three axes by manipulating this. So this camera offset was set up in a video previously, of which I'm gonna put a link to in the description down below. So make sure to check that out if you haven't already. But without further ado, let's get started. So guys, in the UI, game UI, I have added a new button called the zoom button, and I have given it this little icon that we have over here. So if you see the zoom button, okay, actually I kind of have added another canvas and a panel also. So if you just uncheck this is where the zoom button is going to be, and when this is clicked, we are going to get this zoom UI panel, and that's what we are going to be setting up. And this zoom UI is just a canvas, and I have set the UI scale mode to scale with screen size, and reference value 1920 1080. That's about it. Then I have added a panel of width and height 200, and set it to this middle right position. Then I have set the pivot on the X to 1.2 and Y to 0.9. Then in the panel, I have added 3 sliders. So these are going to be acting as sliders for X-axis, Y-axis, and Z-axis. I have just changed the normal color and the highlighted color on the slider, as well as I think I have changed the fill. No, I haven't. I have changed the background color as well. Then on all 3 zoom sliders, I have set the minimum value to -10 and the max value to 10. So if you don't know how to add a slider, you just gotta go. You first gotta add this canvas, then the panel, and in the panel, oh, I just think that here you can just go ahead and say UI slider. Then you would just get a canvas and a slider. So what I've done is I just gone to UI again, added a panel over here, then just childed the slider to that panel. That's kind of everything you need to do. Also, I just resized the panel to have width and height to be 200, so that it is kind of looking like this small box over here. Now, one thing we have here is in the Zoom UI, I have added the inventory script, which we kind of made when we were setting up the inventory. But this can be used as is for this zooming UI as well, because this just contains this line of code here, which is to set the game object to inactive when start and when button pressed. So I'm just gonna change the name of this class. So I'm just gonna hit rename, and I'm just gonna rename it as show and hide UI. That should be more appropriate. If we come back to Unity, we are gonna get this error. That's because we just renamed the script. So I'm gonna have to rename it here as well. And since this is kind of not part of the UI anymore, I mean in the inventory anymore, I'm gonna move it to a new folder. Let's move it to core. I'm gonna hit reload. Okay, hope everything is working fine. Now if we come back to Unity, we don't get that error for this script anymore, so that's cool. And if you check the sliders, zoom X, Y, and Z, I have just set the width to 30 and height to 160. all these are stretched at the center, and I have set the pivot values for z as -2, 0.5, zoom y as 0, 0.5, and zoom x as 2, 0.5. So you can go ahead and use whatever values you please, or you can just use my values if you want to. So this is going to be the panel that we are going to open up when we click this small icon over here for zooming in and out on all three axes. And we are going to be using these sliders for doing that. So now that the UI part is explained, I'm gonna go to coding. In the player controller script, when we set up the minimap, we added a new field called minimap slider, and this is how we set it up using find object of type slider. That was well and good when we had only one slider, but now we are gonna work with more than one sliders, and this is gonna be a problem if the slider that find object of type finds is not the minimap slider. So we are gonna need to go to the fixed button assigner script, and here I have added some fields. So we got an array of sliders, and this just gets all the sliders. So this basically doesn't have a default size. So we are going to use sliders equal to find objects of type slider to get all the sliders in the scene and add them to this array. Then we got another array of type sliders slider, and this is called sliders list. So this has a default size of 4 because right now we have only 4 sliders, the minimap slider and the 3 sliders for zoom in X, Y, and Z axis. Now we are going to do the same thing which we did to get all the buttons. So I'm going to add another for each here. Let's say sliders, slider S in sliders if s dot name equals minimap slider. Oh, by the way, I have kind of renamed the slider for the minimap as minimap slider in Unity. So when we check is dot name equal to minimap slider, we're going to get the minimap slider, and we are going to set it up slider list element 0. Then we are going to just repeat this for other sliders. So if you remember, we had zoom X, Y, and Z. So that's how we kind of get the sliders. Simple as that. Now you can just go to player controller. Here we have slider, minimap slider. Now I'm going to add 3 more fields. Column zoom X, zoom Y, and zoom Z. And instead of setting up minimap slider as find object of type sliders, I'm going to set it up as FBA dot. Okay, actually we don't have a method for that in the fixed button assigner. So let's just copy this method which returns the fixed button list array, paste it here. Instead of fixed button, we are going to return slider array, and the name is slider list, and let's call it get sliders. So we can just use this method in the player controller and get the 0th element. That's going to be minimap slider. zoom X, Y, and Z. Here it's going to be 1, 2, and 3. If we go back to the fixed button assigner, here, if we see the inventory, which kind of is a trick on pressing the button to open up the inventory, what we have done is we have just used find object of type. Here it used to be inventory. Since we renamed the class as show hide UI, it has become show hide UI now. So that's how we used to open up our inventory. But this is kind of not gonna work now because there are two UI elements, both the zoom UI and the inventory UI, both working on show hide UI. So what we gotta do is we gotta make use of find game object with tag. So here I'm gonna change show hide UI to game object, and I'm gonna rename inventory as inventory UI. Then I'm gonna add another field called zoom UI, and the inventory UI is gonna be game object dot find game object with tag inventory UI, and the zoom UI is gonna be game object dot find game object with tag zoom UI. Actually, we are getting an error because it's objects and we need object. Now if we go down, we are going to get an error here. That's because what we want to return is a game object and what we are returning is a show hide UI. So let's change that to game object. Now let's copy this, paste it down here, and let's call this method get zoom UI. Let's also just rename this method as get inventory UI instead of get inventory. Hit apply, and here we are going to be returning zoom UI. Now back to play controller. Since get inventory UI method is itself returning a game object, we don't need to call dot game object dot set active. We can just call set active, and here let's say if input dot get key down Z, or we need another button to have the zoom button. So let's say, or let's just make all the buttons in a single line. And we can go ahead and say zoom button. Also here we kind of need to add the OR condition for zoom X, Y, and Z. There's something I forgot earlier. So let's say zoom X equal to null, zoom Y equal to null, or zoom Z equal to null, and only then we set them up. So only in the beginning we need to set this zoom X, Y, and Z up. Now let's copy this and paste it here. Back to fix our button assigner script. We're going to need another condition, and instead of connected, it's going to be zoom button or zoom button with a capital Z. Okay, that's zoom button, and here's going to be assigned to the position 8, and here I have already changed the size to be 9. So back in the play controller, we're going to need another field for that. Let's say zoom button, and it was in position 8. Let's also add it to this conditions as a note. Okay, now I don't think it is appropriate to call this script fixed button anymore, fixed button assigner anymore, because this is something we use when we had only buttons. But right now we have message box, sliders, and even other UI elements like inventory UI and Zoom UI. So I'm gonna just rename this to UI assigner. Hit apply, and I'm gonna copy this, rename it here as well, and maybe just rename the folder as UI as well. Maybe we can even move the show hide UI script to the UI now. Hit reload. That's all okay. Back in the Play controller, I'm gonna rename FPA to UI. Hit apply, or let's rename it to UI assigner. And I'm gonna go to the fighter script and do the same thing. Yeah, we have FPA in damage over time as well. Let's rename it to UI assigner. We have it in item manager. And I think that's it. So guys, I kind of forgot to set this sliders list to 1, 2, and 3. And we go back to the player controller. We can just set the offset, camera offset dot x equals zoom x dot value, and the same for the other axis as well. And change this from UI assigner dot get inventory UI to get zoom UI dot set active true. Now we're gonna have a problem, and actually it is kind of easier to show the issue. So if we go back to Unity, I have kind of added a new tag and added it to inventory UI and zoom UI. So now if we hit play, now we can switch to Unity and hit play, see what happens. So guys, this is one of the issue we are gonna get. The sliders working fine and the close button is working fine. I'll explain about the close button in a bit. So the problem is, when we begin, we are gonna set the slider to the lowest value, which is -10, -10, -10 on all 3 axes, because our sliders go from -10 to 10. That is something we don't want. What we want is, we wanna have a predefined value for all x, y, and z axis. Then if the user doesn't find it good, he can go ahead and change that using these sliders. So if we go back to Visual Studios, we can just set that up. When we set up the sliders here, like we can just say zoom x dot value equals camera offset dot x, just the reverse of what we do here. So this this command is going to be executed only once, when zoom x, y, or z are not assigned. And once all these buttons and sliders get assigned, we don't have any reason to come inside this if. So this is just going to be assigned once, and after that, if the user doesn't find it good enough, find the zoom values good enough, he can go ahead and change those here using the sliders. Now let's just go back to Unity, and let me first just explain about the close button. So in the Zoom UI panel, after the sliders, I have just added an image called close button, and the width and height is going to be 50 and 50. I have set it to the top right corner so that it comes right here. The pivot is going to be 0.5, which I doubt was just the default values, nothing big here. And here I have just added a button, add component button, and I have added an on-click event. And in the on-click event, I have just dragged and dropped the Zoom UI. And in the Zoom UI, I have attached the show hide UI, which was the inventory script previously, and now we renamed it as show hide UI. So what this does is, as I showed in the start of this video, it just gets the game object to be inactive on start. Once the button is pressed, it's gonna set the game object to inactive. So the thing is, the game object is gonna be the Zoom UI, and it's gonna be inactive on start. Then once we press the zoom button, which we have in the player controller script here, or the Z button on keyboard, the panel is going to open up. The close button is going to be on the panel. So when we click the close button, we are going to call this method, which again just sets the whole game object to inactive. So that's pretty much it. Now we got to go to close button and add the function show hide UI button pressed, which is going to just make the UI panel of Zoom UI go away. So that's how you set up a Zoom using sliders. Here you can adjust the camera view that you need on all three axes, and I think it is pretty cool. So if you like this video, give me a thumbs up and let me know your thoughts in the comment down below. Also go ahead and subscribe to my channel, that would really be helpful. Until next time, see you, bye.